The wrapping paper crinkled in my lap as I peeled it back slowly, carefully. I hadn't expected much. Maybe a scarf. A framed photo of the kids. But when I saw the bristled end poking through my fingers, froze. It was a broom. Not a nice one. Not something you'd wrap with a ribbon. Just a basic plastic-handled broom, the kind you'd find on clearance at the drugstore. Still, I smiled out of habit until Verena leaned in loud enough for everyone to hear. "Here," she said, holding up her wine glass. "Fly now." Laughter erupted around the table. Someone even clapped. My grandson giggled. Verena's friends smirked into their drinks. I looked down at the broom in my hands as if maybe I had misread the gesture. Maybe it was a joke, a misunderstanding. But when I turned to Matteo, my son, he just looked away, took a sip of wine, and pretended not to notice. Not even a nervous laugh, just distance, like he'd already decided where he stood. I straightened in my chair, pressing the broom flat across my lap. I could feel my ears burn the same way they used to when I was a little girl and someone embarrassed me in public. But I said nothing. I smiled. I thanked her. I thanked them all as if this was funny, as if I hadn't raised the man sitting across from me, as if I didn't pay the electricity bill in this very house. The room shifted after that. No one made eye contact. The next gift was a bottle of perfume from Verena's sister, and the attention moved on like nothing had happened, but the silence in my chest stayed. Thick. Still. I used to have a little house of my own, white siding, chipped porch rail, creaky steps that whined in the winter. It wasn't much, but it held every Christmas morning Matteo ever knew, and every quiet night after my husband passed. The kitchen smelled like cinnamon and coffee. The back window overlooked a plum tree I planted the year Matteo turned 6. I sold it 4 years ago. Verena had just found out she was pregnant with their second. Matteo called me voice bright and full of plans. "Mom, we're trying to buy something bigger. If you came to live with us, we could all make it work. You'd have your own room, your own bathroom. The kids would love having you close." It sounded sweet. It sounded like family. I remember sitting at the dining table staring at the offer letter from the buyers. The price wasn't great. The market was soft. But they needed the money now, and I wanted to believe I still had a place. I wired them the money 2 days later. The down payment, inspection costs, and 6 months of mortgage coverage to ease the transition. Matteo and Verena insisted the house would be in both their names for credit reasons, they said. "It's just paperwork, Mom. You'll always have a room here." I believed them. Of course I did. But I also visited my friend Clara, retired now, but still sharp as a tack from her years at the county recorder's office. I asked her if there was any way to ensure quietly that I couldn't be removed. Not easily, anyway. She helped me file a supplemental rider, Clause 18B. It wasn't obvious. It wouldn't trigger unless a specific condition was met, but it was there, buried in the paperwork they never fully read. I never thought I'd use it. Never wanted to. But now, after that dinner after the broom, I sat on my bed with the rider in my lap, reading every word again. Because the house may have their name on the deed, but I remember exactly who made it possible. And I remember what else I planted, besides that plum tree. The first few months I told myself it was just adjustment. A new rhythm. A new family dance. I cooked breakfast every morning, eggs the way Matteo liked them, toast, for the kids. Warm milk with honey when their teeth hurt. Verena would drift in late glance at the table and say nothing. Sometimes she'd dump the eggs in the trash and microwave frozen waffles instead. I folded their laundry even when it was Verena's delicate sweaters or Matteo's socks, balled up and stiff from 2-day wear. I didn't mind. My hands needed the movement. My mind needed the purpose. Once I heard Verena in the hallway, whispering to her friend over the phone. "She means well," she said. "But there's this old smell, mothballs and menthol or something. I have to rewash everything." The next morning, my coffee mug, the one with the red cardinal Mateo gave me one Mother's Day, was gone. Just gone. I found it later in a donation box in the garage. Verena began rearranging the kitchen, too. First, she moved my baking tins, then the spices I kept in labeled jars. Eventually, I'd come in and find her already there, earbuds in hips swaying to music as she stirred boxed macaroni or scrolled her phone while something boiled over. So I started staying out of the way. I made coffee early and left the kitchen before anyone else woke. I sat on the porch with my knitting even in winter, just to breathe air that wasn't measured. When the kids came home from school, I was there. Bandaged knees warmed up rice bedtime stories I remembered from when Mateo was small. They still leaned on me then. They still reached for my hand. But Verena would peek in and frown like I was overstaying, like I was part of a world she didn't want her children to remember. Still, I stayed. For Mateo. For the chance that maybe he'd notice the small pieces of me being boxed up and carried out. But by the time the broom landed in my lap, I realized there was barely a room left to shrink. The cake was barely sliced, and already the guests had moved into the living room with their glasses of wine and whispered gossip. I stayed behind to tidy the plates, not because I was expected to, but because I needed something to do something, to quiet the ringing in my ears from the laughter that still lingered after the "fly now" comment. Verena's voice carried easily when she was relaxed. I heard it drift down the hallway as I placed the last plate in the dishwasher. "She's lucky we let her stay," she said, tone light and careless, like she was talking about a stray cat someone had taken in. Someone laughed. "I'm serious," Verena added. "Next year, she'll be in a facility. Mateo just doesn't have the heart to say it yet, but we'll make it happen." I froze by the sink. The faucet was still running. The sponge in my hand slipped and dropped into the basin. I didn't move. They kept talking, voices dropping into muffled hums as if they sensed they'd said too much. But it didn't matter. I had already heard what I needed to. I walked slowly back to my room, each step heavier than the last. My door clicked shut behind me. The house felt smaller, now colder, like I was already halfway gone. The broom was still where I'd leaned it beside the dresser. I picked it up this time not with confusion, not with humiliation, but with something else. Intent. I sat on the edge of my bed holding it across my lap like a baton passed between generations. Like a symbol. They thought it was funny. They thought it was harmless. But to me, it was the moment the mask slipped. The moment the laughter stopped being background noise and became a warning bell. I leaned the broom gently against the wall, again, smoothed the quilt beneath me, and reached for the drawer that held every paper I'd once filed away for just in case. Because tonight, just in case had arrived. I hadn't touched the red folder in years. It was tucked behind old tax returns and my marriage certificate, its label faded to pink. But I knew exactly what was inside. Because I never stopped thinking about it. Not completely. I opened it on my lap, smoothing the pages like they might wrinkle from hesitation. The paper smelled faintly of ink and dust, the scent of old decisions made in silence. There it was. Third page, center paragraph. Clause 18B. If at any point the original contributor is made to feel emotionally unsafe, devalued, or subject to undue humiliation within the shared residence full property, rights shall revert to said contributor with 30 days' notice to occupants. I remember how careful Clara had been with the wording. You can't accuse them of anything legal, she had said, tapping her pen on the margin. But emotional safety, that's gray enough to hold power, and human enough to matter. Clara was my late husband's cousin, a sharp woman with soft hands and a spine made of law books. She didn't ask too many questions. She just looked me in the eye and said, "File it. Not because you'll use it, but because you shouldn't have to ask for permission to be safe in your own home." At the time, I felt guilty for even thinking it. Mateo would never let it come to that, I told myself. Verena would warm up eventually. The children would grow and the house would settle into love. Now I knew better. The broom, the whispers, the silence at the dinner table, the look in Verena's eyes when she laughed at my expense. Mateo not looking at me at all. Emotionally unsafe. Undue humiliation. Every phrase in that clause pulsed on the page like a wound reopening. I had planted a seed back then, not because I wanted revenge, but because I'd spent too long being the only one unprotected. I slid the document into a fresh envelope and sealed it without shaking. It was time to bring it forward, not as a threat, but as a truth that had waited long enough. And I already knew who I'd be calling in the morning. The notary didn't ask many questions. He flipped through the documents, read, Clause 18B twice, then looked at me with a raised brow that didn't need words. "Everything here's in order," he finally said. "You sure you want to file this now?" I nodded. Once. "Yes. Today." The stamp hit the paper with a solid thud. Permanent. Simple. Quiet. After that, I stopped by the hardware store. The man behind the counter tried to sell me smart locks with Bluetooth and mobile alerts, but I settled for old-fashioned deadbolts. I trusted metal more than apps. Things that could be touched, felt, turned. It was still early when I stopped at the coffee shop on the corner. A place Verena never liked. She once said it smelled burnt and sad. I liked it fine. They served black coffee in thick mugs and didn't bother with fake smiles. I took mine to go and walked 2 blocks to the opposite side of the street from the house. The home I paid for. The home where my room had become a storage closet for their indifference. I sat on a bench outside the dry cleaners, sipped slowly, and waited. The morning sun caught the top of the roof just right, making it look warmer than it had in years. The curtains in the living room were open, and I could see Verena's centerpiece still on the dining table, fake peonies in a gold vase I never liked. Around 9, her SUV turned the corner. She didn't notice me, of course. She never looked at benches, never looked for people who weren't useful. The garage opened. She pulled in. The door closed. I waited, not just for the right day, but for the right moment. Mateo left first early as always, tie half straight and coffee in a to-go cup he never finished. He didn't say goodbye. He hadn't for weeks. The kids clattered out the door shortly after, backpacks bouncing cereal still on their cheeks. Verena kissed them absent-mindedly and waved from the driveway. 10 minutes later, she was gone too, her gym bag slung over her shoulder, SUV tires crunching over the gravel. Off to spin class or brunch or wherever she disappeared when she didn't want to be seen. That was when I moved. I had packed the items the night before, just the ones that didn't belong to the walls her purse always tossed across my kitchen. Her shoes lined like trophies along the entryway. That yoga mat she never rolled up all the way. I set them on the porch, with care, not as an attack, but as a boundary. Then I changed the locks. The locksmith came exactly on time. I offered no explanation, and he asked for none. He left without a word, and I stood alone on the porch with the new keys in my hand. The house behind me felt different, already lighter. I taped the envelope to the front door with the same blue painter's tape I used to hang the children's drawings. The letter was simple, direct. You have 7 days to vacate the premises. This residence no longer grants you hosting rights. Effective immediately, the original contributor assumes full possession under Clause 18B. I signed it in black ink. Beneath the typed lines, I wrote one more by hand. Humiliation is not part of the lease. Then I went inside, made coffee, sat at the kitchen table and waited. The first knock came at 9:12. Then another. I didn't move. Out on the porch beside her purse and her polished flats stood the same broom she once handed me with a smirk. Still hers. Still waiting. He showed up just before noon. I heard the car door slam hard enough to rattle the front windows. His jaw was tight, eyes already blaming. "What the hell, Mom?" I stayed seated at the kitchen table, my hands wrapped around a warm mug that didn't shake. I looked at him and waited. "You're blowing this out of proportion," he said. "She didn't mean anything by it. You're seriously kicking us out over a..." joke. I didn't answer right away. I just looked at him, the boy I had raised, whose tiny shoes I once tied every morning, who once cried when I missed a school play, now standing over me like I was a stranger in a house I paid for. "She gave me a broom," I said softly. "On my birthday." He opened his mouth, but I raised my hand. "No, Mateo. Let me finish." I stood slowly and walked to the envelope that still sat on the counter unopened by him. "She gave me a broom," I repeated, "and you sat there. You didn't laugh. You didn't speak. You looked away. And do you know what that told me?" He didn't answer. "That you saw it. That you knew. That my place here, whatever was left of it, was only as solid as her patience." He swallowed hard. "It wasn't like that. It was exactly like that," I said. "Every mug of mine she moved, every comment she made behind my back, every time you told me to let it go for the sake of peace. I let it go until there was nothing left of me but a body folding your laundry." His shoulders dropped then. Not out of understanding, not yet, but because he knew I wasn't backing down. "I gave you everything I said. She gave me a broom, and now I'm giving her the door." He looked at the floor. Behind him, the screen door creaked open slightly with the breeze. I didn't offer to close it. The day after Mateo left, I found a small white box on my front step. No ribbon. No name. Just a folded piece of paper taped to the top, and the faint scent of almond and sugar drifting through the cardboard. I brought it inside and opened the note first. "I saw what you did." It was the most peaceful justice I've ever witnessed. Clarice next door, blue shutters. I remembered her in passing, quiet, older than me by maybe 5 years, always trimming her roses with gloves that matched her wide-brimmed hat. We had exchanged waves, but never words. Inside the box were 4 little pastries, flaky, warm-looking, like something someone makes when they don't want to intrude, but still want you to feel seen. I smiled, not because I needed her to understand, but because she did anyway. I made a pot of coffee, cut one of the pastries in half, and sat by the window. No noise. No tension pulling at the corners of my day. No waiting for footsteps overhead. No fear of whispers behind closed doors. The house was finally quiet, but not empty. Later, I stepped outside and waved toward the blue shutters. Clarice lifted her gloved hand without a word. That was enough. I spent the afternoon sorting through closets. Not out of bitterness, but readiness. I pulled out my sewing machine from its box, dusted off a pattern I hadn't touched in years. I donated the baby toys, packed up the old towels Verena always complained about, and kept only what still felt like mine. By evening, the front step was clear. No shoes tossed against the railing. No yoga mat leaning on the wall. Just the sound of wind moving gently through the porch chimes I'd hung back up. The broom was still there, tucked behind the door. I hadn't thrown it away. Not yet. I had one more thing to do first. Months passed. The house felt different now, not just because it was quieter, but because it breathed again. I repainted the living room walls a soft wheat color, and finally took down the curtains Verena had insisted on, the ones that blocked the light. I opened every window that spring and let the house remember who it had belonged to all along. I planted basil and tomatoes in old clay pots along the porch. I stitched a new table runner for the kitchen white linen with red thread the way my mother used to do. I even bought a new mug, just one, red with a small gold rim. The broom stayed tucked in the back of the coat closet for a while. I wasn't sure what to do with it at first. Part of me wanted to throw it out to purge every trace of what it symbolized. But eventually, I knew. I mounted it in a shadow box and hung it just inside the front door. Not as a joke, not as a trophy, just a truth. It was framed against black velvet, the handle polished, the bristles cleaned, but still worn. Below it on a small plaque, I had engraved just 6 words: "Leave only what you carry in." Visitors sometimes ask about it. Clarice was the first. She stared at it, then looked at me and smiled without needing an answer. It's not there to shame anyone. It's there so I never forget what it cost me to claim peace, what it cost me to stay silent for too long. This house is mine. The floors I scrubbed, the money I gave, the meals I cooked, the bedtime stories, the stitched curtains, the quiet that was taken and returned. It is not a gift they gave back. It is a space I reclaimed. And if anyone comes through that door again, they'll understand one thing without needing to ask. No one flies out of this house with what they didn't earn.